July 30th, 1975. The clock strikes 2:30 p.m. at the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. In a dimly lit phone booth behind the building, a powerful voice whispers down the line, "They stood me up." The words are laced with urgency, frustration, and a hint of something darker. On the other end, his wife listens, not knowing these will be among the last words she ever hears from her husband. Within minutes, James Riddle Hoffa, one of the most influential labor leaders in American history, steps out into the hot summer air. He walks across the parking lot, his figure casting a long shadow on the asphalt. Then, just like that, he vanishes, leaving behind a legacy, a mystery, and an entire nation on edge. What could have happened in those brief, fateful moments? Why did the man who once brought presidents to heel, who stared down mobsters and politicians alike, suddenly disappear without a trace? Was it simply a meeting gone wrong, or something more sinister orchestrated behind the scenes? For decades, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa has haunted the American imagination. Theories have multiplied, rumors have spread, but the facts remain as chilling and elusive as the day he vanished. Every story must start somewhere. For Hoffa, it begins with a hurried phone call, a broken appointment, and the silent expanse of a parking lot that would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in modern history. But who was Jimmy Hoffa before he became a headline and a cautionary tale? To understand the disappearance, we must first turn back the clock and trace the life that led him to this fateful July afternoon. Turning back time, the man behind the mystery. Before he became the centerpiece of America's greatest unsolved disappearance, Jimmy Hoffa was already a legend in his own right, a name that commanded both respect and fear. Born in 1913 to a working-class family in Indiana, Hoffa's rise from humble beginnings was nothing short of extraordinary. By the time he reached his 40s, he had become the undisputed leader of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, one of the largest and most powerful labor unions in the world. Hoffa's charisma was undeniable. He possessed a keen intelligence, an iron will, and a natural ability to connect with the working men and women of America. To his supporters, he was a champion, someone who fought tirelessly for better wages, safer conditions, and dignity on the job. But there was another side to Hoffa's legacy, one forged in the shadows of backroom deals, political maneuvering, and uneasy alliances with figures from the criminal underworld. Marriage offered little refuge from the storms of public life. His wife, Josephine, stood by him through triumphs and scandals alike, their family life often overshadowed by the relentless pace and peril of Hoffa's career. Even after serving time in prison for jury tampering and fraud, a sentence that seemed designed to end his influence, Hoffa was not content to retire quietly. By 1975, he was maneuvering to reclaim his place at the head of the Teamsters. This bold attempt sent shockwaves through both the union and the shadowy world of organized crime, who viewed Hoffa's comeback as a threat to the precarious balance of power. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Hoffa's calendar revealed a telling detail: a scheduled sit-down with two notorious figures, Anthony Tony Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, names synonymous with the Mafia's grip on Detroit and New Jersey. Was this meeting a genuine attempt at reconciliation? Or was it a warning, a last-ditch effort to silence a man who knew too much and refused to stay in the shadows? Beneath the surface, alliances were fracturing. Old debts, broken promises, and simmering rivalries came to a head, setting the stage for a disappearance that would send ripples through the corridors of power for generations to come. Cracks appear. Warnings and tensions. In the world Hoffa navigated, alliances shifted like sand, and loyalty was always conditional. As 1975 unfolded, tensions that had simmered beneath the surface began to erupt, offering warnings that, in hindsight, seem painfully clear. At the center of these rising hostilities were two men, Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone. Both were formidable in their own right. Tony Pro, a key figure in the Genovese crime family operating out of New Jersey, and Tony Jack, a power broker in Detroit's criminal underworld. Their reputations alone sent chills down the spines of rivals and allies alike. When Hoffa's calendar marked a sit-down with both men, it wasn't just a business meeting. It was a gathering heavy with unspoken threats. Why would Hoffa risk such an encounter? Some believed he was desperate to broker peace, to reclaim his influence without violence. Others suspected he underestimated just how far his former partners were willing to go to preserve their interests. In the months before July 1975, subtle but ominous signs surfaced. Strange phone calls, cryptic warnings, and sudden changes in Hoffa's security habits. Yet the man who had once stared down enemies with unwavering confidence refused to back away. Investigators would later cite the Hoffa's memo, compiled in early 1976, as a crystallization of these mounting dangers. The memo, born from exhaustive FBI analysis, argued that Hoffa's attempt to return to power had triggered panic among organized crime leaders. They feared that his return would not only upset the lucrative status quo, but also expose secrets too dangerous to see the light of day. For those closest to Hoffa, the signals were troubling but familiar. In his world, threats were currency and paranoia was a survival instinct. Still, even seasoned observers wondered, would Hoffa's reputation protect him one last time? Or had the balance finally tipped too far, making his disappearance a grim inevitability? By the final days of July, the lines had been drawn. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the course of American criminal history and leave investigators grappling with questions that still echo half a century later. The disappearance. July 30th, 1975. A timeline. It was an ordinary Wednesday. At least it seemed so at first. But for Jimmy Hoffa, July 30th, 1975 would become the day his name passed from headlines into legend. The hours ticked by, each moment quietly propelling him closer to the vanishing point. Around 2:00 p.m., Hoffa arrived at the Mafia Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, just outside Detroit. Dressed in a crisp shirt and trademark confidence, he was there for a sit-down, a meeting that promised to settle scores, or perhaps to reignite old feuds. On the agenda were Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, both familiar faces from the world of organized crime. For Hoffa, this wasn't just business. It was a gamble for his future. By 2:30 p.m., patience gave way to frustration. From a phone booth behind the restaurant, Hoffa called his wife, Josephine. His words were clipped. "They stood me up." He was agitated but far from defeated, determined to wait a little longer in the sweltering Michigan heat. What happened next is a matter of record and speculation. At approximately 2:45 p.m., a witness saw Hoffa leaving the parking lot, heading toward an unknown vehicle. That fleeting glimpse would be the last time anyone could confirm his whereabouts. In those final silent minutes, the most powerful union leader in America simply vanished. Later, investigators would follow a faint trail. A Mercury car connected to Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, a trusted Hoffa associate, became a focal point. Forensic analysis would eventually find traces of Hoffa's hair in the vehicle, suggesting he was driven away from the scene, but the evidence stopped there. Where he went, and what fate awaited him, remained locked in shadows. Despite a flurry of search efforts, no physical evidence of violence was found at the restaurant, nor any sign of struggle in the parking lot. The meeting's other supposed participants, Tony Pro and Tony Jack, denied any involvement and insisted they never showed up. And so, as the sun set on July 30th, the Hoffa case shifted from urgent investigation to enduring enigma. The timeline was set, the clues sparse, and the silence deafening. A perfect setup for half a century of questions, suspicions, and theories that would haunt both the Hoffa family and the American public for generations. The investigation, witnesses, forensics, and dead ends. As the initial shock of Hoffa's disappearance settled, investigators launched one of the most exhaustive searches in American history. The FBI, local police, and an army of journalists descended on Detroit, eager to find answers, or at least a single clue that might explain how a man so powerful could simply vanish. The first hours focused on interviews with witnesses at the Mafia Red Fox. Multiple accounts confirmed that Hoffa was seen waiting in the parking lot around 2:30 p.m., and that he made a call from the phone booth to his wife, expressing frustration at being stood up. At 2:45 p.m., one witness described seeing Hoffa approach a maroon car, believed to be a Mercury, before disappearing from sight. No one recalled seeing him return. No commotion, no struggle, just a man stepping off the map. Attention soon shifted to forensic evidence. Decades later, in 2001, FBI technicians analyzed hairs found in a Mercury driven by Charles "Chucky" O'Brien, Hoffa's longtime confidant and surrogate son. DNA tests confirmed the hair belonged to Hoffa, supporting the theory that he left the parking lot in that very car. Yet, as compelling as this was, the trail went cold. There were no traces of blood, no signs of violence, and no physical evidence to point toward a final destination. In pursuit of every possibility, investigators combed through hundreds of leads, anonymous tips, cryptic letters, and underworld rumors. The FBI's massive Jimmy Hoffa Part 0118 file, now declassified, documents years of dogged inquiry, wiretaps, stakeouts, polygraphs, and painstaking interviews with mobsters, teamsters, and family members alike. But each potential break led only to disappointment. High-profile searches, digging beneath a Detroit home in 2006, excavating concrete in Roseville in 2012, scouring Oakland Township in 2013, and most recently, searching a landfill under the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, 2021 to 2022, all turned up empty. The legends about Hoffa being buried under Giants Stadium, encased in concrete, or incinerated within hours of his disappearance, captured the public imagination but yielded no proof. Despite the scale and tenacity of law enforcement's efforts, the investigation hit a wall. Every promising lead was methodically checked and time and again eliminated. The evidence was tantalizing, but never enough to close the case. Decades later, the Hoffa mystery remains a monument to the limits and the frustrations of even the most determined investigation. Turning points, critical evidence, and shifting theories. Every investigation reaches moments that seem poised to break the case wide open. Brief flashes of clarity amid the fog of rumor and uncertainty. For the Hoffa case, two such milestones stand out: the 1976 Hoffa's memo and the 2001 DNA breakthrough. The first turning point came just months after Hoffa's disappearance. In early 1976, the FBI compiled what would become known as the Hoffa's memo, a comprehensive report synthesizing everything investigators had learned up to that point. The memo drew a sharp, unflinching conclusion. Hoffa's disappearance was almost certainly the result of a meticulously planned hit, ordered by organized crime. It named names: Tony Provenzano, Tony Giacalone, and their closest associates, transforming these men from mere persons of interest into prime suspects. This document would become the strategic backbone for all subsequent inquiries, shaping both law enforcement strategy and public perception for decades to come. The second major shift didn't occur until more than a quarter-century later. In 2001, forensic technology finally caught up with the mystery. Scientists analyzed hair strands found in Charles "Chucky" O'Brien's mercury, hairs that DNA confirmed belonged to Hoffa himself. For the first time, the case had physical evidence linking Hoffa to a getaway vehicle after leaving the Mafia Red Fox. This wasn't just a lead, it was the closest thing to a factual breakthrough the investigation had ever produced. Still, even this discovery came with caveats. It revealed how Hoffa left the restaurant, but not where he ended up or who orchestrated his fate. Despite these pivotal moments, the rest of the puzzle remained stubbornly unsolved. Every credible theory, every law enforcement hypothesis, had to pass through the lens of organized crime and the Hoffa's memo's findings. But as years went by, the trail grew colder. Suspects aged, died, or kept silent. Evidence decayed, and memories faded. What these turning points offered, more than closure, was a hard lesson in the limits of even the most determined investigation. The facts, so tantalizing, so close, kept the hope of resolution alive. But the deeper truth remained just out of reach, reminding investigators and the public alike that some mysteries are destined to haunt us for a lifetime. Verdicts, closure, and lingering questions. As the years slipped by and leads dried up, the reality of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance began to shift from an urgent investigation into a legal and emotional void. No indictments were ever handed down. No criminal trial ever convened. The men most frequently named as suspects, Anthony Tony Provenzano, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, and their circle, maintained their innocence, stonewalled investigators, or passed away before law enforcement could build a case that would hold up in court. The absence of a body only deepened the sense of unresolved tragedy. In 1982, after 7 years of silence and unanswered questions, the Oakland County Probate Court made a somber declaration. Jimmy Hoffa was officially presumed dead as of July 30, 1982, the 7th anniversary of his disappearance. This was not justice in the traditional sense, but rather a legal formality. It allowed his family to settle his estate and move forward in the eyes of the law. But for those who loved him, and for a public still captivated by his story, it provided little comfort. There was no verdict, no moment of reckoning for those who might have ordered or executed Hoffa's disappearance. Instead, the process left behind a trail of unresolved questions, swirling rumors, and a case file that only grew thicker with time. The courts, bound by evidence and process, could go no further. And so the case entered a new phase, a space where memory, myth, and modern investigation all collided. For law enforcement, Hoffa's fate remained an open case, a challenge to future generations of detectives, forensic scientists, and armchair sleuths. For his family, it meant a lifetime of not knowing, a wound that could never fully heal. 50 years later, the Hoffa mystery still looms over American history like a shadow. The official record may be closed, but the story itself is very much alive, whispered in union halls, debated in documentaries, and dissected in newsrooms every time a new tip, however unlikely, bubbles to the surface. Legacy, consequences, and the enduring mystery. Half a century after Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, his absence continues to ripple through American history and culture. The Hoffa case is more than just an unsolved crime. It is a parable about power, trust, and the limits of justice in the shadowy intersections between labor, politics, and organized crime. The consequences were both immediate and far-reaching. For the Teamsters, Hoffa's disappearance marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter defined by federal oversight and relentless scrutiny. Within his family, the loss was personal and profound. They were left with legal closure but not emotional peace, forced to navigate decades of speculation, media frenzy, and false hope. Each new rumor, each fresh excavation, reopened wounds that never truly healed. The FBI's commitment to the case has never wavered. Even as of 2025, 50 years after that summer afternoon in Michigan, the Detroit field office still welcomes new tips, a testament to the case's enduring hold on public memory. The files are thick with failed theories, tales of Hoffa buried under stadiums, entombed in concrete, or destroyed in a blaze of secrecy. Yet, not a single physical trace has ever been found. Massive digs and high-profile searches, fueled by folklore and whispered confessions, have always ended in frustration. If there is a lesson in Hoffa's disappearance, it may be this. In the face of alluring legends, true investigation demands caution, patience, and humility. The rumors may enrich popular culture, but they have repeatedly failed the basic test of evidence. The search for closure, both for law enforcement and for the public, remains elusive. A constant reminder that some secrets are fiercely protected by those who benefit most from silence. In the end, Jimmy Hoffa's story is a mirror held up to America itself, a tale of ambition and betrayal, of loyalty and loss, of how quickly certainty can dissolve into myth. The unanswered questions are as much a part of his legacy as any accomplishment in life. Until the day a final piece of evidence surfaces, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa will remain one of the great unsolved mysteries, a puzzle challenging each new generation to look just a little deeper. Nearly 50 years have passed, but the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa continues to captivate the public and haunt those who search for answers. His story stands as a powerful reminder. Even in an age of forensic science and relentless investigation, some mysteries remain just out of reach. What really happened on that summer day in 1975? Did Hoffa fall victim to the very alliances that once secured his rise? Or was his fate the result of secrets still hidden in the shadows of history? If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like and follow the channel to explore more of history's greatest unsolved cases. Your support helps keep the search for truth alive.